Welcome. We're going to get started. The following session, titled CCLE XXV Vadis, the next 25 years of Lutheran education, will be presented by Reverend Robert Pohl. Reverend Pohl serves as headmaster at Memorial Lutheran School in Houston, Texas. Let us welcome Reverend Pohl.
Thank you, Pastor Kieser. Again, if you're in this session and brave enough to come to a session without a description, be braver and come all the way to the front. Because at the very end, we're going to try and do some brainstorming, and we're going to pass the microphone, and I don't need you to get your steps in that way today. So, where are we going is what the Latin intends. Our discussion this morning will begin with a brief introduction and soft periodization speech. Then we're going to talk about generations, because generally 25 years gets boiled into generations. And I'm going to try and relabel Boomer, X, etc. For our purposes. And I'm also going to borrow a little bit from Jonathan Haidt and the anxious generation, because for better and for worse, we have our own generation that is a little less anxious, but fits in the same time period. So after we look at that, we're going to look at the accomplishments of the first quarter century of classical Lutheran education, both CCLE and broader. Obstacles and opportunities facing classical Lutheran education, lessons learned from the first quarter century, and then what does the future look like? We're not Nostradamus. Jesus can certainly show up before I'm done talking, which would be fine with me, maybe with you too, but if we get 25 more years, what do we want to do? And so we're not going to vision cast because I'm wearing a collar, but we're going to do some of that, and partially it's selfish because I'm generally in charge of the strategic plan for the CCLE, so then we can get some ideas for that from the people who probably should be giving them to us, first off. And second of all, I figure this is the best place to figure out if there are other people doing things that we should know about, so we can actually go forward in the next 25 years in a less sort of judges way, everybody just doing what's right in their own eyes because we all went to the conference and we're members of the CCLE so we can do what we want, and in a more unified way that tends to be a challenge in America because we're so diverse by nature of where we live. So that's the path I'd like to take this morning. 25 years is a significant period of time. And when you look at it in history, if you take Luther, for example, in the 25 years that follow his death, you have all the interims and the Peace of Augsburg and the prelude to the Formula of Concord. A lot of stuff happens in 25 years. If you take the Revolution, from 1776, in 25 years you get the Constitution, and you get Washington, and you get Adams, and that's 25 years. The First World War started 25 years before the Second World War, if you think that there's really two instead of one with a break in the middle. 25 years of 1999 to about now, 2025, is the first quarter century for us in its formal sense. But like everything, it's better to be soft about your periodization than it is to be hard, right? The 1960s, when we talk about them, it's not January 1st, 1960 to December 31st, 1969. It's like 65 or 66 to like 72. The Middle Ages are the middle of what? Right? They're certainly not the Dark Ages. That's Petrarch's way of looking at it. So soft periodization is better. I mean, we have to call things something, otherwise we don't know what we're talking about. And so I want to look at generations that we have as classical Lutheran persons. And I don't want to use the normal ones like boomers and X and millennial or Y and Z or alpha, but we're going to use those as kind of corollaries. So the first generation I'd like to call the visionaries or early pioneers. And I do that because some of them are only vision casting. They're just writing books, they're just teaching classes, and others are starting schools at home, actual brick and mortar schools, and they tend to be the people who were born in the time period of the boomers. They tend to be people born in the 40s and 50s into the early 60s. And so that's going to be our first generation, right? We don't really have corollaries in the so-called silent generation or greatest generation. It tends to be people post-World War II birth who are interested in revivifying education, at least in our circles. The second group of the Gen X, I would call the pioneers or the first wave of immigrants, because they are people who are either starting new things because they've either listened to the visionaries or are visionary themselves, or they're the people who are coming in to what's already been talked about and created, and they're taking their wagon and they're getting rid of stuff on the way and becoming naturalized into the classical Lutheran worldview. When you move to Y and millennials, and I'm very eager to get rid of that moniker because I smoke a pipe and drink Manhattans and don't really care about stuff that usually fits with my group, I would call them second wave immigrants or naturalized citizens. Because most of us, born in the 80s, are hearing this from other people. There's a few outliers who were raised by the pioneers. But most of us were not. We've immigrated. We've come out of something, whether it's a Lutheran school or a public school, and we've made our home here. And we are speaking the language that we've moved into. Then, borrowing from Haidt, I'm going to condense everybody from 1997 to the babies that we have here into one generation. He says that although people talk about Z and alpha, he sees it as one generation because they're all being raised on phones. I mean, not ours usually, but at least out there, they're all being raised on phones. They don't really know a life without that kind of invasive thing. So I'm going to blend it together. I also don't want to spend any time talking about brain rot. And if you don't know what that is, God has blessed you. So I'm going to call the Z group the native born, because most of our kids are not immigrating. We might have immigrated, but they're being born in our tradition. Right? They don't think that CCLE usually is foreign. It's exactly, right? These are their friends. It's a sort of a summer retreat. They know how to sing all the services. They're the easiest sight readers when we bring in new hymns that are really 500 years old. So I'd like to call that generation native born. Now, because of soft periodization, everybody in here is probably going to say, don't use those terms because I was born then, or I immigrated at this time, but too bad. You got to call something. So visionaries, early pioneers, these were working generally in the 90s into the early 2000s. And that's the Vadis, and Pastor Scheibler, and the Heinies, and Tom Korchak, and Joel Brandos, and Steve Hine, and Dr. Kopf. That's our visionary first pioneer class. There are other names you can add, but I find it's helpful to mention these people, right? A lot of theory, a lot of influence, a lot of equipping teachers and teaching, and certainly creating schools. But they're the people that we make everybody else read, right? When I went on vicarage, it wasn't at Mount Hope, but it kind of was. It was at Trinity in Casper. My wife was teaching at Mount Hope, and they called me the vicar of both congregations. What did we read to get ready to understand what my wife would be doing? We read Cobb's book. That's what we read. We went to the seminary library and took out all the books that they had, and that's what we read. So that's our first generation, rediscovering, handing over, starting the yeoman work. It also parallels Society for Classical Learning and ACCS because it's about the same time, like we heard from Dr. Veith in his plenary this morning. The pioneers and first immigrants are really starting to work in the aughts of this century, 2000 to 2010, and that's the Hills and the Keezers, it's the Gaubs and the Priners, it's Pastor Kane, it's Mrs. Mildred, it's Cheryl Swope, it's Julia Hobrecht, it's that group starting to lay things down, founding schools, planning accreditation. Now certainly they're working with the first pioneers and the visionaries to do it, but they're putting in the yeoman work that many of us benefited from, right? I'm only 38, right? So I wasn't confirmed when the first CCLE happened. I didn't know, I kind of knew there were Lutheran schools, maybe, right? I grew up on Long Island in New York, and so I knew I was a Lutheran, but I didn't know any of this. And I certainly wouldn't have thought I'd be doing this. I was to be a pastor. In my 5th grade yearbook, there's a picture that looks exactly like me now, except no attempt at a mustache. And a white polo shirt and my name, and it says pastor. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I knew that part. But I didn't know, right? Like an immigrant, you know sort of where you're raised, and then you move places. And sometimes you're forced to move places, sometimes you're just guided there. So going to God's country in Wyoming was a necessary part of getting here today and having native-born kids who don't know anything different than classical Lutheran education. The second wave, me, some are children of visionaries and help people move in. This would be the Murbys and the Richards. I'd put the Bensons sort of in between first immigrants and second wave. This is where a lot of the newer headmasters in the past 10 years, they get converted in seminary, they get converted in the field, they show up at a conference. That's where those families fit. They are converting schools, they're founding schools, they're growing schools. Sometimes, of course, as we'll talk about a little later, the schools don't last, the different generations have created. And that's just a fact of life, in the same way that although the church is guaranteed by the Word of God to last forever, that doesn't mean that your individual congregation will be there until Jesus shows up. Right? Time goes on, towns disappear. I don't know that we're really used to that, but in more Western areas, there was a history of the Lutheran churches in New Mexico in my desk, and I left it there so that way somebody else could read it, when I was a pastor in New Mexico. And in the history of the Lutheran churches in New Mexico, there were congregations in towns that no longer exist. At one point, the train that no longer exists went past that town, and there were Lutherans there, and they needed a pastor, and then they moved. They didn't need a pastor. That's also why there are several churches that all have the same name in New Mexico, because they were all served by the same guy who rode the train to all 3 churches all day long on Sunday. The native-born are all the kids that are here right now, and some of the ones that are at our schools that don't come to the conference. They are the grandchildren of the Keezers and the Hills and the Veiths. They are my kids and your kids. They will have different challenges than us, but they're being raised differently. They don't know too much different. I mean, we live in the 21st century in America, and I think that hopefully in the 22nd century, if Jesus tarries, they'll be able to say that the 21st century education was actually classical education, not the dying state-bred nonsense or what today people call as 21st century education. It's a little early. I believe in soft periodization, but it's a little early to say that whatever you're doing right now is 21st century education, unless the 21st century is only Y2K to tomorrow. You don't really get to make that decision yet, especially since the people who created one-to-one devices don't let their children have them. So, in 25 years, those who are, and this is a reality check that I sort of said before, so we're all going to die, unless Jesus comes in the meantime, and then it'll just be different. But in 25 years, those who are the pioneers and the visionaries, if they're not already with Jesus, will be in their 80s and 90s. They're in their 60s and 70s now. The pioneers and the first immigrants in their 50s and 60s today will be in their 60s and 70s. The next wave of immigrants and those who are naturalized into classical Lutheran education are in their 30s and 40s. And we're going to be in our 50s and 60s. I will be 63 at CCLE 50. And probably still chaplain, hopefully, and talking to my grandkids about what they should be doing. And they won't listen. Maybe they will. I like to think that our children listen differently and better. And then the first generation, who are infants through 20s now, will be in their 30s and 40s. And they'll be helping us move and introducing. And their kids will be in Grammaticus. And their older kids will be watching the babies in pre-Grammaticus. That's what's going to happen if God allows for 25 more years. I think we're still going to be hanging out together. Who knows, it will be 500. It could be underground. At least we have tunnels here. Right? So if it has to actually be underground, we have a couple of locations that we can pull it off. So that's the first way of thinking about 25 years. The generations that have passed and are currently with us, and where we are going. In the first 25 years, we've already heard the growth of the conference, and it as a galvanizing mechanism for spreading classical Lutheran education. Many people cut their teeth at a conference. Their parents were running it. They were brought there. My first conference, I was the associate pastor in Roswell, New Mexico, and Pastor Dan Preiner was on the board. He planned on me taking his spot. He told my name to several people who voted. Back in those days, everybody voted in here for who was on the board. And because Preiner greased wheels and told people what my name was, right? Nobody knows who you are. When you first come to CCLE, I got elected. And there I was, sitting with Pastor Heine, who would tell me, I have big plans for you. That's very nice. I appreciate, right? You're older than my dad, and that's nice. I look up. And then, of course, right, as the Lord is taking him home, who does he say needs to go to Memorial Houston? That's what the big plan was the whole time. So the conference is a huge thing, even though I think it's important to note that we were the tortoise to the hare of all the other classical groups. Right? ACCS, SCL, they are in different places than us. Now, it's helpful that they're a bit more hare and less tortoise because we can see what they have done well and wrong, and we can beg, borrow, and steal. And our goal for the Institute online is to replace people using Classical U. In the future, it'd be great for us to have all our own material like Classical U, and that way all our own stuff gets given. Classical U is wonderful, and currently there's no other way to get all the things they do. But eventually, all the good things that they teach, because plundering the Egyptians is part of our tradition, all the good things they teach we'll be teaching. All the bad things that they teach we won't be teaching. I mean, we have our own things we got to work on, and then we'll have all those videos for our people to use, our teachers. Accreditation is a huge accomplishment of the first quarter century, and we plan to continue with accreditation even in the face of new opportunities that exist in states, right? As education savings accounts come online and there's less red tape, supposedly, and it doesn't look like Wisconsin and Indiana with regards to voucher money and being tied to curriculum, we have our own way of accrediting. And because of the last 25 years of hard work and partnership with NLSA, if you're a Texas school, you already have the things that allow you, perhaps, if you choose, to take advantage of ESA. Right? We can plunder the Egyptians, and sometimes there are Egyptians in our midst. There were sojourners in the people of Israel, and there were Israelites who weren't fully Israelites. Certification was a huge accomplishment of the first quarter century, both for teachers and for administrators. The fact that our schools are K-12 education, certainly we have early childhood centers, but that's more of a mortification of the flesh thing for us. It's not really what classical Lutheran education is, but in our contexts, those things exist. But in the past 25 years, it was only K-8 and then maybe some homeschooling for high school. There were the attempts at high schools, Colorado Springs. There were attempts in many of our schools of just adding naturally, but now we have schools that are graduating seniors, that are creating profiles, that are putting people in college and that are, right, have a full way of facing the world where we have a diploma and we have classical Lutheran graduating classes and ceremonies, and that didn't exist 25 years ago. And that's continuing to grow. And I'm not one of those, let's get to 20 people and then 40 people and then 100. However many people come to our schools is perfectly fine with me. We graduated 4 seniors last year and 5 seniors this year, and God's giving us 9 seniors for next year. But however many He gives us, we'll graduate them, and we'll set up the lights and sound and put ferns on the stage and bring in people who are significant to preach and teach and have the band play, because we can do that. We sing lots of Lutheran hymns in the service, and we do them in discrete spaces, but over 25 years we've been able to grow and institutionalize things that used to be backyard, or maybe still are backyard, and that's perfectly fine. The Foundling University programs is a tremendous accomplishment of the first 25 years. The fact that at our Concordias that God permits to still exist, you can go and be trained in some form or fashion to be a classical Lutheran teacher. That didn't exist 25 years ago. Now, certain professors were more likely to set you on positive paths. My wife always says that the professors at Bronxville didn't set her up for total failure when she got an education degree. Certainly, some probably did at Bronxville and elsewhere for those who got education degrees. I didn't get one of those. I just took Greek and German and all those sorts of things, and then turned out to be a teacher. But the fact that we have university programs, and the fact that in August and September, the first fall semester of Luther Classical College with, as I was told, 38 freshmen, right? It's a huge accomplishment. And hopefully somebody will say in the brainstorming session at the end that we should have other LCCs. I'm sure somebody will. And hopefully you also know somebody with seven-digit gifts so we can buy some land and build some buildings. You can keep the names to yourself for now if you have them. I'm not trying to get them. But having Luther Classical College opening with their students, but open now, training faculty, giving the incoming students who don't have Latin, is a tremendous accomplishment from the first 25 years. The founding of the Institute that just started with the new classes coming out this fall on the internet, like I said, as a goal to replace a reliance on classical U. The fact that we've had curricular guides and resources, countless videos and presentations, and playlists on YouTube for you can watch until Jesus comes back. And you won't run out of watching those videos. Now, there are obstacles and there are opportunities that face classical Lutheran education. I think the first 4 that we can call obstacles are skepticism, hostility, apathy, and anecdotal irrelevance. I mean, I'm sure there are more, but we can start with the last one first. Anecdotal irrelevance is essentially the context thing, right? Well, it works for you, in your place, and it works for your family, but we're just going to do what works for us. And so your anecdote about your children who know Latin and can compose poetry and are on par with creating the next book of Kells with calligraphy, right? That's fine. And we'll even come to all your presentations and support you, but we still need to send our kids elsewhere. Or we need to have our school do this. Anecdotal irrelevance is an easy cop-out. We can just, that works for you. We're a pluralist society. We're used to doing that with our family members and with our town council, so we'll just do that with education. And we'll do that as congregation members. We'll do that school to school, district to district. Well, you're in Texas, you're not in Wyoming, you're in, right, we don't have any yet in New York, it'd be hard. We have one actually that would fit in Center Reach on Long Island that's doing classical things. But certain states are harder to break into. You have to have confessional Lutherans, and certain states have less than others. And B, certain states have really strict education laws. It's not a surprise that Texas and Wyoming are the beginning places, because it's a little simpler to do that in those states than it is in other states. Skepticism is something we're used to dealing with. Hostility, you're telling me I did everything wrong for all of what I can remember? I mean, who hasn't done everything wrong at some point? I mean, right? It's important to be humble and realize that if God's giving you good things, you should learn from them. And that there are things that are better than other things. And they might both be good. And sometimes we have to cultivate people's appreciation of what is better. And sometimes we also just need to realize that there are admirable things and esteemable things, and they are different. Right? You'd be silly not to admire the Tetons. God has created them to be admirable. Now you could say, I don't like going there because I can't breathe, or I need to live in a tunnel, or it's too far away. But you can't say that they're bad, because God has made them fantastic. You can choose how often you go, and that's esteemable, right? Opera as an art form, I would say, needs to be admirable, because those people are doing really phenomenal things. I mean, are all of you projecting your voice without a microphone, memorizing French, Latin, Italian, and acting on stage, and singing great stories? Now, you don't have to like all of them, and you could say that some of them give you bad morals, or maybe you like them because they help you go to sleep, but there's a difference between admirable and esteemable. Right? There are great culinary dishes that you might not want to have all the time. And you might be able to say that beef Wellington is admirable. It takes a lot of work, it's really fancy, but you can't really eat beef anymore. And you're not going to go around and stop everybody from eating beef Wellington because you only eat fish because your doctor said you should, right? But you can admire things and esteem things differently. That helps us get rid of apathy, because apathy is just sort of linked to sloth if you just don't care about classical Lutheran education. One day, and people have said this before, that their hope is that we can just call it education again and not have to add adjectives, but we have to be specific, because there's education that's not Lutheran and there's education that's not classical. And so, I mean, once upon a time, this was the Consortium for Classical and Lutheran Education. There was an and. It's still in the bylaws and Articles of Incorporation. We got rid of it because we didn't want people to turn the and into an or. right? Why can't we just combine it together? Right? It'd be like the German and Lutheran synod of something. The and can sometimes shift, so we made it smoother. It's classical Lutheran education. I have board members who want us to invert them and call it Lutheran classical education. Because primacy of place, right? Lutheran first and foremost, and classical second. We have to call things something. We can't just say that thing over here, because not all of you have this. I don't have one of these, so I can't just point to that. Right? The opportunities are the number of schools opening. You know, every board meeting, quarterly, Mrs. Dr. Veith gives us a list that seems impossible for visits for accreditation, renewal, and new schools. Because every year, more people are moving through the process and adding, and more inquiries are starting schools. We have eager learners desiring continued education. The fact that we're continuing to offer Greek and Latin online, even though it should be classical Greek, but that's fine. The fact that we're continuing to offer pedagogy and people want to attend these classes, right? Everybody eagerly attends CCLE and looks forward to what everybody talks about in the sessions. That's an opportunity, because studiousness, eagerness is an important thing to take opportunistically. We finally have a rising generation of classically educated youth. We've talked about them for a long time, but they're graduating institutions and we're hiring them, and they're teaching at our schools. Right? We have, who I started calling yesterday, our big kids that are teaching at our school, right? Ones that were not born in the 1900s, like most of the rest of us. But they're thinking classically. They want to be more classical if they immigrated, right? They're alive and thriving, and we've talked for a long time about a pipeline, and now we have different pipelines. Now, you know, the oil doesn't flow as fast as we'd like it to sometimes. It's still flowing, it's just kind of slow. And the success and energy associated with LCC and Christian culture and all of our sort of subgroups. Right? There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of excitement that's still pushing us forward into the next generation. Now, in the first quarter century, we learned that schools close and open, and that's hard for everybody. When a school closes or a school starts to look like it's closing, or right, that's just a fact. We also learned that volunteers and volunteerism is limiting. It's part of the tortoise versus the hare on the one hand, and it's challenged especially because society tells us all to say no now. And I mean, I'm the most guilty of always saying yes. But we do exist to do things. So if you keep on saying no, you might get in the way of vocation. I know everybody's got limited resources, but I'm hoping to exploit every single one God gave me for as long as I get to. So you have to be wise about what you say yes to, but society's really big on saying no. Don't do this, don't do that. Take your mental health time. Take your space. Now, everybody needs vacation. They do. Sabbatical, that kind of rest. I think that's important. But I'm probably going to tell you to say yes to something and not say no to it, generally speaking. Because who else is going to do it? I mean, we are. So let's do it. The optimal usage of immigrants and the first generation pushing the horizon is something that we're learning and need to keep on learning, right? Our kids that are volunteering and taking care of our other children right now, the ones that eagerly attend Scholasticus, the ones that sit in the back in the adult sessions, their eagerness is something that we've learned continues to grow. And the Wittenberg Academy is an excellent lesson learned, right? Most classical educators are trying to minimalize tech, but where we can't have schools, Wittenberg Academy thrives. So people can utilize technology wisely in order to get a classical Lutheran education. We've also learned that the future needs a wise vision because early on we've had to do a lot of fighting with words arguing, discussing. It's tiresome. And so we need, the lesson I think that we've learned and continue to learn is that we need wise deliberation and colloquy. At some point, we have to admit that certain things were done poorly or wrong and we need to move on. But I think we've learned that we need to, in our presentations, in our choices of how we deliver things, that wisdom should prevail instead of just charging into battle all the time. There's still battles to be fought, but I think the wise approach tends to, it's not necessarily winsome, it just admits that it's a long game and it takes a long time to reclaim what really belongs to us as our culture and education. We've also learned that context limits application of ideas and principles, etc. And that's what I want to get to at the end, talking about how we can, as a group, agree on things or think about doing things that we can use everywhere. Everybody's got a different context. You have limiting resources with regards to what you can teach and when you can teach it, etc. But if we agree on our principles and ideals, there's got to be a way of doing more things together instead of everybody does what's right in their own eyes. And I mean good things right in their own eyes. It's sort of a, we teach Latin this way, or we introduce it in this grade, or, but just trying to get some level of agreement. I've been serving on a committee because of a synodical resolution of creating standards for Lutheran curricula. And it's a wide variety. President Hill is on that committee. And that work is important. It's hard because you've got people from all over our synod in these meetings, 12 of us, trying and representing the fair gamut of different kinds of schools, trying to agree on statements about history, English, math, science, fine arts, right? What are the underlying standards that we can have, like that God is the Lord of history, or that God actually institutes language, those sorts of standards. So I think we can use that as a model for the so-called vision casting. So where do we go? We're kind of in a judge's present, and there can certainly be a judge's future, where every classical Lutheran school and homeschool just does what's right in their own eyes, and maybe we'll talk about it at CCLE and beg and borrow and maybe steal, but it's tribalized. And part of that, it's very difficult to, not all of us or any of us are very good at corresponding frequently because we're all very busy. We don't have a society of letters where we can write feverishly into the night about how great our lesson was and send it to somebody else. And we don't have time. But there's got to be some way of less tribalization. It also helps for us to sit down and talk this way because, like in the time of the judges, you may not even know what's going on somewhere else, right? The first time that I learned that Samson and Samuel were contemporaries, my mind was blown. I don't think of them that way, or I didn't, because Judges comes before 1st and 2nd Samuel in the Bible. Therefore, Judges happened first, and 1st Samuel happened after. But they happened at the same time. Now, I think Samuel was wise and probably didn't talk to Samson, and didn't send letters. I don't know that Samson would have responded. He was kind of busy. But the more aware we are of what we're doing, right, and this is not just CCLE, but classical Lutheran, right, what our colleges are doing, what our schools are doing, what we're battling, what we're winning in, I think the better we share that, the more we can engender consistency. So there could be a Solomonic future, only a couple of chapters of 1 Kings though. Hopefully nobody's buying horses from Egypt and starting a harem. Right? We don't want 1 Kings 11, but maybe 1 Kings 3 through 8. Wisdom that can be shared. The problem that happens with us is that apart from heavenly wisdom, there's not really a temporal answer, because we're fallible. So when we say we like this Latin curriculum, we can say, well, I don't. I mean, you get in trouble if you say, I don't like this chapter of the Bible, and try to remove it. And we can all say, right, you're not allowed to do that. But we can't wave the same finger when it comes to math that we can when it comes to the biblical text. I think we can create better guidelines, but it's just not the same thing. And synodical and American impulses keep us regionally and locally bound. Right? On the one hand, we can't avoid some of the state things that do exist in different states, and so that stops us from sharing curricular ideas or grade level ideas, and sometimes we're just too far away. What works in Wyoming maybe doesn't work in Texas, or in Texas, right? Every part of Texas is different. Some parts of Texas aren't really Texas. So I think perhaps that we can pursue a wise future together in the forms of culture, as we already sort of have, and curriculum. But with not too much time left, I want to give you some of my own goals as broad brush, and then I want to ask you what your own goals are or would be for classical Lutheran education. And it can be CCLE oriented, because we have an institution that allows us to push things. Right? We can ask for things in accreditation. We can require things in certification. We can pursue things in our strategic plan that maybe it doesn't make sense for an individual homeschool or school to do. But then there are other things that the CCLE maybe doesn't have to do that we can just do together, or share together, or a publishing house can do, or, right? So I think that we need intentional classical Lutheran curricular development to where we have consistent things that we're using together. And there's going to be arguments like classical versus Koine Greek, and maybe God will take me before the argument's over, so that way you don't have to deal with me for that long. But I don't think we should be starting with Koine Greek at our schools when we're teaching Greek. We should be starting with classical Greek and making them slog through it, and slog through it yourself, so that way you can let them have more than Koine Greek. Right? Some of our schools offer one or the other, but I think we just need to listen to all the presentations this week about reading Latin and Greek and endeavoring to teach our kids to read Latin and Greek. And just get over the fact that people are going to say no. If they're in our schools, that's what they should be learning. Many of them won't do it very well. As Pastor Christian Preuss said at some presentation, part of the reason you learn Latin is to learn maybe you're not good at everything. And that you need to learn that certain things are hard, and that you need to do them anyway. God happened to make me pretty decent at Latin, so I don't feel that way. And he also made me confident enough that I try not to feel like that in any subject. So I really loved the calculus presentation yesterday, even though God did not really make me a math person. But in the spirit of Jesus, I will not allow my old Adam to tell me I don't like math. I will let the Holy Spirit tell me that numbers are great. And I will keep trying to love math more, even though it's harder than loving Latin or Greek or Russian or Hebrew. So intentional curricular development. And I know that takes a lot of people and some money. It's already happening, but I would like to see that more focused. Intentional classical Lutheran administrative training and development. So most headmasters are simply thrown in. They have no idea what they're doing. And then eventually they just keep asking people questions and they figure it out. Once I finish my PhD, which I'm going to do, I'm going to start picking people's brains and working on our own headmaster training stuff. That's my wife already approved me doing that. Not that I need that, but I double check. So that's what I'm going to do, because we will always have shortages of pastors and teachers and administrators, because you need to rely on God and not on pastors, teachers, and administrators. But we definitely do not have enough ways of training administrators. We can borrow SLED and we can borrow master's degrees, but I would like to help cut through that and try to produce something that just works for us and for our future headmasters and principals. Intentional classical Lutheran outreach in Lutheran education, we're doing that, right? We have 2 district presidents preaching who love what we're doing. On our strategic plan, we include district outreach and district connection as one of the things that we're trying to do where it works. Now, I'm not cold calling all the DPs, but as generations rise and fall, there are definitely more pro-classical DPs than there probably ever were, if you just look at who keeps getting elected, or who surprisingly gets elected. Right? The North Dakota district president graduated a couple years before me, and at call night was asking me, I'm not moving to Bismarck. So I said, you're not taking me to North Dakota, but I'll help you look for people who could go to North Dakota and be a principal. I mean, we've got people wanting to do this in all different parts of the country that we didn't have 25 years ago. And then an intentional desire to form wise leaders and emissaries, right? If our education is to produce eloquent and wise Christians, we need to keep learning to be wise. And as long as God gives us time, which he continues to do, we should play the long game and work in that time. I don't know that we need to just hurry up. I don't think we should be lazy. But we've had 25 years, and we might get 25 more. So let's diligently make use of all the time we get to continue to make better what God has already given us that's great. So what do you think we should do? It's not a rhetorical question. We're going to take notes. This can be CCLE, and I don't really believe in democracy, so just because you say something doesn't mean it's going to be on the strategic plan. But I do value input. So all of us think differently. There's not a one of us that thinks exactly the same as the other. So everybody's input could at least be valuable. And don't think that your question or your thing is stupid. Let somebody else tell you politely that it might be, or not. But I would like to hear, and we'll just pass the mic, and my wife's going to write, and I'm going to write, what we should either be doing as CCLE, what we should be doing as a group, what you want to see.
All right, I'll give you my opinions. I've been involved with this movement since 2008. I'm in the pioneer category, so I've seen a lot of change. You mentioned a concern over tribalism, and I have no view into the breadth or the depth of that, but in my mind, generally speaking, I wonder if that's going to even itself out over time, because a lot of the schools and programs and the ideas regarding classical education were developed by people like me who were learning as we were doing it. And that stuff, as we know, gets corrected because of what we're learning. So that's my opinion on that. Concern that I have, and we've been discussing this at home with others as well, is the threat of institutionalization. We say we're moving out of the movement stage, and my view, personally speaking, is that I wonder if the movement is truly large enough for the vigor to carry us through into institutionalization. That's a concern that I have. So those are my thoughts. I thought I would share with you.
Can I just say something before I pass it back? I think that there's kind of a disconnect with the school board at our church anyway, and they don't really understand what we're trying to do. So maybe if they can be educated, they have a good heart, they're in the right place, they just don't get it.
I am not in a place to cast any visions, but I am in a spot where I have looked at histories that have been very concerning. I delved into the early history of an institution we now know as Concordia University, Chicago, by means of Evangelisch-Lutherisches Schulblatt, which we now know today as Lutheran Education Journal, which is definitely not the kind of publication it was at its inception in 1865, a year after we finally managed to plant a viable teachers' seminary in Addison, Illinois. There had been efforts in Fort Wayne that perished before that. There was an effort in Milwaukee that perished before that. And the Synod finally rallied around that need because the pastors who were being put out of our seminaries at the time were overburdened and we needed people in the classroom. And because the Synod was founded as a vociferously anti-rationalist, anti-pietist synod, it's written all over our original Constitution, that continued for a very long time, but it had its limits. 1838, we come over here from Saxony, the royal we. 1847, we found a synod, and we're trying to get things off the ground and moving. 1864, we have the Addison Teachers Seminary, and you have J.C.W. Lindemann, a firebrand author and editor. I would say that the majority, possibly even a supermajority, of the articles that he wrote, or the articles he put out in the Schulblatt from 1865 on, just one punch after another against all of the incorrect anti-Christian teachings that were in the world at that time. And he was not one of the Saxon immigrants. He came over on a different boat. And it does kind of show. But there was a single point of failure. Be on the lookout everywhere for single points of failure, because I don't quite have all of the research I would like to have. If I had to redo my second master's thesis over again, this is how I would do it. J.C.W. Lindemann dropped dead in 1879, and that publication went adrift very badly, such that by 1891, you have articles appearing in the Schulblatt that would have sent all of the boats back down the Elbe the other way. So, be careful. The good headmasters who are here, you have done the yeoman's work. But when it comes time to retire, plan that out if you can, at least 5 years in advance, and bring up your protege. Bring up 2 of them. Send one out, keep one there in your place if you can. Avoid single points of failure. That happened synod-wide with J.C.W. Lindemann's death, and even his son, Frederick, was not nearly as solid because he was in that next generation. We have a big risk of our kids not knowing how good they have it. Be on the lookout for it. Be on the watch.
If we define the Lutheran classical education as the 7 liberal arts and Lutheran catechesis, where are languages in that? I would like more guidance in that. I hear so much about Latin and Greek, but it's not really in the definition, maybe implicitly.
It
has to be because grammar, logic, and rhetoric can't exist outside of human language. I mean, we don't just, we have to use words, and Latin and Greek are the chief languages of our heritage. We have to teach Greek and Hebrew because God chose to reveal himself in Greek and Hebrew. So that's the Lutheran focus. I know that we can try to contextualize Latin, but Latin always was revived on purpose. It's a preserved language. I won't just call it dead. Maybe fermented, but it's preserved. And it was, whenever it came back, because it always did, right? It was brought back because it could be used. It was very useful. It was brought back by the Carolingians. It was arguably dead. It was brought back, well, at the time of the Renaissance. We're bringing it back now, but it always gets sort of resuscitated. It's either sleeping or dormant, right? Preserved well. So we, of course, live in English, so we have to teach other things in English. There's a place for other foreign languages, I think, but that needs to be contextual. However, the traditional definition of a classical education has always included Latin and Greek, and we don't need to get rid of it. That's not something we should correct. We should continue to hold to, right, what people who founded Harvard thought was necessary then, not now. And just keep doing that.
So if I have an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old, all boys. So the 8-year-old wants to be a pastor, 10, 12-year-old is not. So should the 8-year-old take Greek and then Hebrew and the other boys take Latin, or should they all start with Latin? And at what point?
The tracking question is a good question, which we're not going to answer. But there's room for the tracking question. We have a senior at our school this year who actually is asking that question in his senior thesis. Is classical Lutheran education for everybody? He said, I know it's for me, because I know how it benefits me. But what about the people, he didn't say this, but what about the ones who aren't that smart? What should they get? So that's a real question. I think everybody should, if we're in school, I mean, we don't require Greek, we require Latin, but Greek gets you to the New Testament eventually. So you can't go wrong learning it. And it's not like you're going to sin by taking Greek. What else are you going to do? I guess you want one. John Adams was told to dig ditches or learn Latin, and he tried to dig ditches and he didn't like that. We've got some threats. But I want work to do. Come on. Or maybe some of you want.
I have a microphone. So I'm in a small community in northern Nevada, and we're trying to start a small school. I incidentally do not have an education degree. But I guess what I would be looking for right now is if there was a way to start like a cohort of other startups right now, just to have conversation, check in, like, what are you doing, what's working, what's not working, what curriculum are you using, especially being small, kind of out there.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And if we're at time, there's lunch. I don't mind staying for a little bit with all of us, but you can also come up to me in a little bit and we can write things down. If you are, so I want a Latin book. I want a math book.
Which we do.
Yeah. Okay, let's take 2 more.
You had mentioned about headmasters or pastors that were thrown into being headmasters. You raised your hand. As you know, I'm one of them. Thank you for all the text messages and emails that you responded back and forth. My question is, do we have a timeline, or 2 questions. Do we have a timeline as far as that resources for training headmasters the way that we want them to be trained? And then the second is kind of piggybacking on what she said, but is there any resources that would kind of guide us to where other classical schools are, so that way we can have quarterly meetings or cohorts and the like?
Yeah, that's good. Let's take 2
I was just kind of going to say the same thing about knowing where everybody is so that we can, because we're also in Nevada, I need to talk to you. Because out in the West, we're small in, like in the number of congregations and things out there, but it would be so great to not have to travel halfway across the country for symposia and things like that. If we could even get CCLE to come out and do things on the western part of the country, that'd be great.
It seems to me that most of the schools we have are K-8, and then after that we have fewer resources. Wittenberg's great, but what about those who might like a hybrid option or something like that? Some sort of method to continue into those formative years.
All right. You want it for everybody? Microphone, thank you. Well, and after this one.
Hi, my name is Allie Ziegler. I'm from Effingham, Illinois. We are trying to start a classical Lutheran high school. And the grade schools, we have 3 grade schools feeding in, they are not classical. I have found in this process, we did the Genesis project, we are looking to open fall of 27. I found in this process that there's not a lot of resources for the things that don't change between communities. Like, you need a good marketing plan. You need to do this, and what steps to do those in to successfully start a school. And if they were written down, right now we're kind of like, I think we should do this next. It seems like the right thing to do next, but there are things that don't change no matter where you live in the country, that if there were a step-by-step process to follow, to make sure you're doing it correctly, to make sure we're not making the same mistakes another school made, that would be super, super helpful. Just very practical things like good marketing, capital campaigning. That's what I'm looking for. That's why I'm here. So, thank you.
We do have that with the results lottery.
Yes. Thanks everybody for listening and input. Enjoy lunch, and if you have stuff you want me to write down, come on up.